The Auditor-General provides assurance to Parliament on the accountability and performance of the Victorian public sector. The Auditor-General conducts financial audits and performance audits and reports on the results of these audits to Parliament. On the 5th of February 2014, the Auditor-General tabled his performance audit report, Managing Emergency Services Volunteers, which is timely given the 5th anniversary of the Black Saturday bushfires on the 7th of February. This anniversary is a sobering but timely reminder of the crucial role that volunteers perform. They give their time, risk their safety, and do an outstanding job protecting the lives and property of all Victorians. This was an audit of the management of emergency services volunteers. Volunteering is critical to service delivery in Victoria. Volunteers help to deliver a range of services relating to welfare, sport, education and training, and in managing the response to and recovery from emergencies. As well as contributing to the community, volunteers generally provide services at a lower cost than a paid workforce. This is particularly so for large government agencies such as the Country Fire Authority and the State Emergency Service. In 2006, the value of volunteering in Victoria across all services was estimated at around $16.4 billion annually. Victoria has an active volunteer workforce with a participation rate of around 35%, which is consistent with the national average. This equates to around 1.5 million people over the age of 18 volunteering each year. Agencies reliant on volunteers face some challenges in sustaining their volunteer workforces, with the majority of volunteers aged over 45 years. The ageing volunteer workforce is more pronounced in regional areas, with almost a quarter of volunteers aged over 65 years and nearly 60% aged over 45 years. Attracting volunteers in some sectors is also a challenge. This is particularly so for Victoria's emergency services, which have the lowest volunteer participation rate at around 4%, much lower than the national average. The Country Fire Authority and the State Emergency Service are Victoria's two largest volunteer-based emergency services organisations. CFA is the largest, with around 57,000 volunteers, of which 38,000 are operational. Operational staff are those that typically directly respond to emergencies, while non-operational staff perform functions such as community education, recruitment and catering. CFA operates outside of the metropolitan Melbourne Fire Brigade boundary, with a heavy focus on rural and regional Victoria. CFA's key roles include responding to structural fires, bushfires and rescues, as well as things like education and awareness. SES is much smaller, with an estimated 5,000 volunteers. It operates across the state and is Victoria's lead agency for responding to natural disasters, such as floods and storms. SES also responds to road crash rescues, often in conjunction with CFA and other emergency services, assists Victoria Police with search and rescue, and also assists other agencies during major bushfires. The objective of the audit was to assess whether CFA and SES effectively and efficiently manage their emergency service volunteers. This involved examining the planning around their resource need, how they recruited, supported and retained volunteers, and finally how they trained and used volunteers. The audit concluded that CFA and SES don't adequately plan for sustainable and capable workforces, and nor could they assure themselves that they had the volunteer workforces they needed to carry out their responsibilities. This was due largely to a lack of understanding around the number of volunteers it needs and ineffective volunteer recruitment practices. Shortcomings in understanding capability and capacity and understanding why volunteers leave were also evident. While CFA is more advanced in addressing these weaknesses, SES still has much work to do. Workforce planning is essential to develop an understanding of CFA and SES capacity and capability to meet service delivery. Despite this, both agencies have only limited awareness of their volunteer workforce requirements. Identifying and addressing volunteer needs happens at the local level, with the consequence that senior management don't know how many volunteers they need across the whole organisation. CFA, for example, identifies a number of volunteers with specific skills that it needs, rather than the minimum number of volunteers it needs. While SES identifies a number of volunteers it needs, it doesn't have a sound understanding of the number of volunteers it has. Without an accurate baseline, it can't know what the gap is and what the need is. Both CFA and SES routinely recruit volunteers. However, neither has a coherent strategy for this activity. Recruitment happens at the local level in an ad hoc way that doesn't consider the strategic needs of either agency. Compounding this is the absence of any performance framework that would provide senior management of either agency with information about how effective their recruitment practices have been in meeting their needs. Training is critical for emergency services volunteers given the dangerous nature of the work they perform. Both CFA and SES have processes to identify the training and skill requirements of its volunteers. Both agencies generally provide training in line with these requirements, although this occurs inconsistently across each organisation, with the same training taking differing amounts of time to complete, or differing expectations around the amount of training. The processes that each agency uses to identify skills and skill gaps also contain weaknesses, as they consider non-participating volunteers. This inflates the capability and capacity of volunteer brigades or units to respond to emergencies. It's evident that CFA and SES are using their volunteers to respond to emergencies. However, there are weaknesses in their deployment processes that have the potential to reduce the effectiveness of incident response. In particular, neither agency matches existing volunteer skills to potential roles. Also, neither agency routinely records information on volunteer availability. Such information is critical for operational purposes and to assure CFA and SES that they have adequate workforces to respond to incidents when they need them. Recognising the importance of a sustainable volunteer workforce, both CFA and SES provide a range of volunteer support services. These services include volunteer support officers, peer support and counselling. At CFA, these services are supported by an overarching volunteer support strategy. However, SES does not yet have such a strategy, and as a result, its programs are ad hoc and don't clearly work towards SES's objective of supporting and resourcing its volunteers. Retaining as many volunteers as possible is essential so that there is a ready and capable workforce to respond to emergencies. Like any organisation, CFA and SES experience volunteer turnover, although retention is greater at CFA. As the figures on pages 33 and 34 of the report show, 50% of SES's volunteers have been members for less than 5 years, and 70% have been members less than 10 years. Conversely, 24% of CFA volunteers have been members for less than 5 years, and 41% less than 10 years. SES's relatively poor performance is in part attributable to the lack of any strategy to address volunteer retention. However, neither organisation has a sound understanding of the reasons why volunteers leave, with CFA not undertaking exit interviews and SES's exit interviews not providing adequate information to understand the reasons. The audit made 10 recommendations in total, all of which have been accepted. CFA has provided us with an action plan to address the recommendations, while SES has committed to develop one in the short term. All our reports are available on our website. If you have any questions about this or other reports, or if you have anything else you would like to discuss with us, including ideas for future audit topics, please call us on 03 8601 7000 or contact us via our website.